and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and as you can see from the title and the thumbnail, today's video is an adaptation competition, all about the most faithful and best adaptations that have been made. And so back in September, I covered Rosemary's Baby, and I talked about how that movie was so faithful, and it made me want to make a video all about faithful adaptations. And now here we are in May, and I'm finally getting around to making that video. But I thought it would be fun to have someone else join me for this discussion. And so I invited Ink to Film, Luke and James. Luke is a writer, James is a filmmaker, and over at Ink to Film, they also read the book and then watch the adaptation and talk about it. And so I invited them on for this video, and Luke had the idea to do it like a March Madness bracket competition. As we narrow it down and pick a winner, faithfulness is a key aspect, of course, but this is also just very subjective, and it also comes down to our personal preference and our taste and which movies we just like more than others. But there are three of us, right? And so we have to come to a consensus amongst these three different opinions, while also taking into account how faithful the adaptation was to the source material. And then I also wanted to clarify, just even though this is about choosing the most faithful adaptation and like this is the winner of adaptations, I don't think an adaptation, in order to be good, it doesn't need to be super faithful. And it also doesn't need to include every little detail because it just wouldn't work. They're two totally different mediums. But anyway, even though all three of us enjoy all types of adaptations, whether they're faithful or whether they kind of do their own thing, like we like all kinds of adaptations. But for the sake of this video, we are just focusing on the most faithful. But anyway, I guess I will stop rambling now and we can just hurry and get to the competition. By the way, I did post this bracket a few days ago for people to do on their own in preparation for this video. So comment down below what movie won when you did the bracket, and let's see how it compares to the one we will end up choosing. So share that down below. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and thank you again to Ink to Film for joining me for this, and let's get right to it. Okay, so I am here with Luke and James from Ink to Film. So thank you guys for joining me for this video.
Of course, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Between the three of us, I just counted mine up. Of course, now I can't remember what the number was, but I've done over 200 book versus movie comparisons. I know you guys have reached 300
episodes. I don't know. You might have done more individual projects now because you always do like a single video, right?
That's true.
In my master list, I think we're around 180-ish.
Yeah, which is
but that's
still
not counting. That's not counting bonus episodes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're probably over 200 then.
So yeah, we have created this bracket here, and yeah, do you guys have any thoughts before I just jump right into the bracket?
I was just going to say, I think you did a great job with some of these matchups because it's like some of them are very thematic. Some of them are going to be really difficult to decide. So good job with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know when this episode's going to come out, probably not for a little while, but we are off the heels of the Gators winning the March Madness tournament.
Yeah.
I don't watch a ton of basketball, but I, am from, we both went to the University of Florida and we're rooting for them. So that was what kind of gave me the idea when you were asking about this video and what we wanted to do. So hopefully people are still down for some tournament style brackets.
So I will kick things off and I will just start with this top one right here. So we have Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is of course based on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And then I paired that up with The Princess Bride. So Willy Wonka, I guess I'll just start off sharing my thoughts on that because that one, I think, the major story does stick to the book. However, I will say I love Gene Wilder's portrayal of Willy Wonka, but I do think he comes across maybe more cynical than the book Willy Wonka did. So that is one change as far as how faithful it is. And then, of course, the fizzy lifting drink wasn't in the book either. And so even though I love Willy Wonka, as far as faithfulness goes, there are those changes to consider. And then Princess Bride, this one, as far as faithfulness, I think this one might be even more faithful. And William Goldman, he adapted the script as well. And so much, when I read the book, I was kind of surprised at how much dialogue is just word for word right from the book. And so Princess Bride, the book does have more added details. And then the Pit of Despair is a little different. But I think as far as faithfulness, Princess Bride is the closest to the book, but then as far as which one we prefer, that might be another question. But yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on this one?
So this is Roald Dahl being adapted, right? He's an author that we've touched on several times. I have a mixed sort of feeling about his work in general. He's not my favorite, but he's got a lot of whimsy to him. It's a lot of fun. This adaptation is one I grew up with, have a lot of fondness for. It's, I think it's got some of the greatest like musical moments in cinema.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely
Your
love
imagination
this film.
is amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then Princess Bride, what a matchup, because this is also a really interesting look at adaptation. You have an author adapted himself and then go back and like revise and add on to the book and start to like fold in the meta narrative of having the film made. Like if you read a later edition of the book, there's all this stuff about the making of the film is now wrapped into the narrative. It's so interesting, and I love what he did with it. I thought that was really clever. It's a movie I have a lot of fondness for too. I know that, James, this is like one of your favorite movies, I feel like, or it's really up there. This is a tough one for me to choose. I'm definitely curious your thoughts. I think I'm leaning personally... I think I'm leaning Princess Bride. I don't know. This is a tough matchup, and a lot of these are going to be tough.
Should I say which one I'm leaning towards, or should...
Sure.
I'm leaning towards Princess Bride because I do think it's more faithful, but I think I love Willy Wonka. But yeah, Princess Bride, I just rewatched it from my episode, and it's just so fantastic. So yeah. I think all around Princess Bride would be the better choice.
Yeah, this is an interesting format because, I have to wrap my mind around like which film do I prefer, what's the better adaptation, like all of those things are kind of swirling around. And for me right now, I think of, like you said, that Gene Wilder performance. There is like an edge to him in that film, and it is different than the kind of whimsy of the Roald Dahl story. While he does have some social commentary being built into it, there's just that. I was a little afraid of Willy Wonka growing up, and I love this film anyway. But like Luke said, The Princess Bride is one of my favorite films. It like perfectly encapsulates this like romantic fantasy kind of world, and then the meta narrative within. And it's so clever, it's so funny. And if we're just compare it to like the adaptation process, and we're to think about what's the better adaptation, I do think Princess Bride kind of like grabs onto the spirit of that original Goldman novel and like delivers on it in such a major way, and all the stars are amazing in it. And while I think Willy Wonka is a good adaptation, we've had multiple iterations of Willy Wonka at this point, and there's only one Princess Bride, and I think it's because they nailed it and you can't change it.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
I mean, Goldman wrote the screenplay, so if we're talking about faithfulness, like the voice is right because it's the same writer. I'm with you. I think this one's decided. If we, if you're good with it, I'm good with it. I'm gonna go ahead and write it in on my
Princess Bride.
All right. So, am I choosing next?
Yeah.
Next matchup. Okay. Let's go for something completely different. Let's bounce over to, how about Gone Girl versus Silence of the Lambs? We got Gillian Flynn, author of Gone Girl, who is someone who I've said on our show has become one of my favorite authors we've covered. I absolutely love her writing, but what a great author, great subject matter. And then you get David Fincher come in and make a really excellent film as well. I thought great performances. I'm not as good at like off the cuff thinking about the differences because that's not what we focus on as much on our show. But I know there were some. You probably be better at like laying them out for the listener than I am. But I'll just say that like I liked the movie quite a bit. I know it was one where I felt like the book was a little stronger, at least personally. So that might influence things as we talk about what it's up against for me, which is Silence of the Lambs, Thomas Harris novel, which was good. This is one where I always think about it as being like a very faithful adaptation. Certain things about Hannibal Lecter is like a little different, but like overall, it's actually a pretty dang faithful adaptation. And then this is like one of the first horror movies to ever win Oscars. It was critically acclaimed. It is an excellent film that I've seen many times now, and every time I watch it, I'm always kind of floored by how good it is. So as much as I'm like praising Gone Girl, I think to me this one is, I'm leaning Silence of the Lambs, but definitely curious to see what you two have to say about it.
Yeah, talking about Gone Girl and Silence of the Lambs, another great matchup because I love David Fincher. What Jonathan Demme did with The Silence of the Lambs is like, I mean, kind of landmark for that sort of thriller story, and the Anthony Hopkins performance is just like, I mean, one of the best ever, maybe one of the most iconic ever. And then talking about Fincher with Gone Girl, and like Luke said, I'm a big fan of Gillian Flynn's work and the kind of mysteries and worlds that she crafts and how like grounded and traumatic they can be. This is a Fincher adaptation, and he just tends to be this like very meticulous. He's the kind of filmmaker I'm going to see everything he makes. He's super meticulous. I thought that there really some great performances with like Rosamund Pike, especially. Man, just comparing them again, that adaptation process, and not comparing like what is my favorite of the two. if I was to think about like what was better adapted, Gone Girl seems like it was fairly similar from my memory. But yeah, I do feel like Silence of the Lambs is one we tend to point to as like, this is one of the most faithful that we can have. And I think it matched the tone really well. I'm honestly really torn on this one with maybe a slight nod towards Silence of the Lambs right now.
Yeah, and this is one, so like I paired them up because they're both thrillers, but also, yeah, both of these are just so faithful to the book. And then like all the way around Gone Girl, I love both book and movie. And then same with Silence, like the book was still so good. Like I was not surprised because I had read Red Dragon first, and that one was fantastic too. But yeah, I think both of them also just have an incredible cast. Like Gone Girl, I can't imagine anyone else in any of those roles. Even, Rosamund Pike is the highlight, but everyone, Neil Patrick Harris, Ben Affleck, they're all fantastic. But I think, I covered Gone Girl in 2021, and then I recently redid that one as well. And I still think a complaint I have with the adaptation, which I guess I don't want to get into spoilers, but there is a change made to Nick where I feel like I preferred his character dynamic more in the book, even though Ben Affleck is great and I love what they're doing in the movie. And if I hadn't read the book, I wouldn't even have it as a complaint. But whereas Silence of the Lambs, I think is just like, there's nothing I think they needed to improve with that movie. I think it was just fantastic. So yeah, I would say Silence of the Lambs for this one.
That sounds pretty unanimous to me.
Yeah, you've convinced me. Yeah, you make a good point with like a little bit of the change to that character. I definitely think I'm leaning Silence of the Lambs then, and I mean just Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins in those roles. Like I think those will end up being more iconic than the Gone Girl one. So I'm leaning that way. All right, one of my favorites that you put together here is these horror icons of Frankenstein and Dracula. And these like beloved novels with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula. And those are the names of the films that we're actually talking about here as well, because there's a lot of different iterations. Frankenstein took me on quite a journey. I mean, you have Robert De Niro's Frankenstein's monster, and then you think of Gary Oldman's Dracula in this other film. I would say two pretty high-profile, iconic adaptations of these works. So I'm really curious to hear what you guys think. I am going to start out by leaning Dracula because I think what Francis Ford Coppola did with this film was unique for the character, and then just like he kind of laid the groundwork, in my opinion, for what Branagh eventually did with this Frankenstein adaptation. But I just like super like metal surrealist kind of adaptation of, especially early on, of Dracula with like his like red heart armor, and then all the way through to like everything we get, and even that iconic Keanu Reeves performance I'll give a nod to.
Yeah, this one, so in our video for the monkey we were talking about camp. I don't know if Frankenstein is considered camp, but maybe because it's so over the top at times and you're just like, what?
Could, yeah.
Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein could definitely be considered, I think.
Yeah, so that's a good example of a campy movie that I love because I loved it so much. And a lot of their performances, they are like so over dramatic, but then when you read Frankenstein, a lot of the characters are kind of over dramatic, and of course this is like a very insane situation he finds himself in. But I almost want to say, I mean, Frankenstein, granted, it's been a couple years since I covered that one, but I almost want to say that one is more faithful, mainly because Dracula adds in the romance aspect, which was not in the book at all.
Yeah, look at me getting off format just because I like the movie a little more, maybe. Yeah.
No, I mean, there is some stuff that I would argue that the Frankenstein film added as well. There was some stuff with the bride that occurred at the end of the film that wasn't in the book, right?
I totally forgot, because, in the book, he tosses the parts away and never even finishes. So that is a huge departure there. That's true. Yeah, this one is tough. So I guess as far as faithfulness, they would probably be equal. So I'm just going to pick my favorite, and I'm going to say Frankenstein because I do like Dracula and Gary Oldman. Yeah. Gary Oldman is the best part of Dracula, and the part at Harker's Castle, that's one of my favorite parts of the book, and they do a great job at making that so creepy and so disturbing. So it is a good adaptation and, all of that, but I just love Frankenstein. There's something about that one that I love.
I love that. So we recently covered both of these on the show, so they're pretty fresh for me. I know that the Frankenstein was one that you told us about that you really enjoyed, and I ended up having a really good time with it too. I know on our episode on it, I was kind of more behind it, I think, than James, just because I really kind of ended up clicking with how just off the wall and over the top everything was, and I ended up having like a really good time with that. And everybody's chewing the scenery in every single moment they're in this film. And yet there's something appealing to that. But all that being said, like Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula is so iconic, and I feel like it was so influential. The look of it with that like a sort of high fashion vibe that they brought in, and costuming, cast is amazing. I will totally grant Keanu, as we said on our show, we absolutely love him as an actor, but this is not one of his best, and he would admit this is not one of his best performances. I feel like just because James and I are on a podcast together and we have to continue to work together, I'm going to have to choose Dracula here because I know he probably strongly feels it's better. But I'll admit, I think that's where I'm leaning to. I think I'll go with Dracula, but I love that you're going to bat for Frankenstein here.
Yeah.
These are actually not that faithful now that I'm sitting and thinking about them. And if I was to choose which novel I prefer, I think I definitely reach for Frankenstein before I reach for Dracula, actually.
Yeah, I think I'm with you.
But in terms of this, I do just find like a lot of layered kind of subtext, and he realistically Coppola made vampires cool again in the early 90s, and like I think that's like pretty worth a claim at that for that.
Okay, so we'll go with Dracula, and then it's back to me, and I think I'm going to jump down. I feel like this is kind of a weird pairing. This is one of the ones that I was making, but I was like, I don't know how well these go together, but they're going together. So that is Big Little Lies and Shutter Island. So Big Little Lies, I was on your podcast for a couple of years ago and we did that. So that book, I love that book so much. I've read it, I forget how many times. At the time we recorded it, that might have been, I think, my third time reading it, and it still held up. And then the TV show, granted, the show they made changes to the ending, but then there were also some character changes. But when all is said and done, I did love that adaptation, and I think the cast is amazing. And then Shutter Island, this is definitely another one where I think incredibly faithful to the book. One of the things I like about the book is that it got more into, which it's hard not to get into spoilers, but yeah. The Leonardo DiCaprio character, we hear more about the marriage with his wife, and he was struggling with alcoholism, and we just got more into that, which I found really interesting. And so faithfulness, I think Shutter Island is more faithful. I also just love the movie Shutter Island. I think it's fantastic. DiCaprio is amazing. But ultimately, I'll just go ahead and say I love Big Little Lies so much. But as far as taking faithfulness into account, that will be the tiebreaker for me. And I would pick Shutter Island because it is the more faithful of the two. Yeah,
really enjoyed both of these. Big Little Lies is a show that's really stuck with me. And like you said, what a unbelievable cast. I mean, just like one of the most iconic casts in I would say the last decade or so. Liane Moriarty like took us on a journey with the story, and then the show, the way it's adapted is like it's so atmospheric, and I think it works so well. And you could say the same thing about Shutter Island. I mean, it's Martin Scorsese. You know that you're going to get something of a really high caliber. And it's not my favorite Scorsese film. It's not even close to my favorite Scorsese film, but I do think that it's a really strong adaptation of a work. I think he improved on the original material in ways that kind of lend itself to the mystery, is what I'll say about that. Great performances, Leonardo DiCaprio, Mark Ruffalo. In terms of choosing which was more faithful, I do think that Shutter Island has like a heavy step in that direction, whereas like Big Little Lies, I think that just due to the nature of like it being a TV show, there was quite a few changes along the way, and some of them were for the better in my opinion. Yeah, this is a really tough one, but I guess I'd lean Shutter Island, with the caveat that Big Little Lies is like an incredible show, and I honestly would like to see it pitted up against some of these other things in the bracket.
All right, so I'm going to come in and try and see if I can sway this, because I think it's leaning a certain way. I like Shutter Island a lot. I think it's not a huge spoiler to say there's some twists in this movie. As if you listen to our coverage of, I was pretty divided about the way the twists were handled, both in the movie and in the book. I appreciate it, but I think you can fairly say that there is some... It's like sometimes the author's not quite playing fair with us, and sometimes the film's not quite playing fair with us. And it's going to be subjective whether or not that bothers you. There's enough about it to me that holds that movie back and holds that project back from being like one of my favorites. I still think it's very good. Now, when I look back at Leon Moriarty, I remember absolutely loving that book. It was a little funnier maybe than the show ended up being. I think the show ended up being a little more serious feeling. But there were so many awesome twists and turns. The ensemble cast that was put together had such great chemistry with each other. I thought it was really well shot. I know there's some tragedy around the filmmaker, I think, passed away. So for me, I'm leaning towards Big Little Lies. And I feel like I need one of you to convert with me if we want to have it win this one, but since we're doing a bracket, we got to have a little bit of contention, right? I don't know. Have I swayed either of you at all, or are you still holding firm with Shutter Island?
It's difficult because I think like you're swaying me, but only because I think that like it's hard to say, but I might like Big Little Lies more than I like Shutter Island. But if we're talking faithfulness, I don't.
That's a fair point. Like I don't know. Are we letting faithfulness like sort of be the tiebreaker here? Is that what matters most, or is like the quality of the product what matters most to us?
I mean, this is about faithful adaptations.
Okay. So you want to let that sort of be the tiebreaker then?
Yeah. But also, like James said, I think I love Shutter Island than both of you guys, but I do think Big Little Lies is one that has stuck with me more through the years. And so, yeah, I'm being swayed a tad.
Oh, maybe being swayed?
But I still think, yeah, Shutter Island is still just one of the most faithful movies, though, where when you read the book, it's still fantastic, and yet it's one of those where it's almost surprising because even like little details come right from the book. And so I think I'll still stick with Shutter Island because of that.
Okay. And James, you're holding fast with Shutter Island?
I think I have to. If we're talking faithfulness,
all right. I made a
valiant
attempt, viewer, listener, but yeah, it sounds like we're going with Shutter Island on this one. Where do we want to go next? Let's go. Let's go ahead and do Cormac McCarthy. Let's go No Country for Old Men and The Road. I'm going to choose this one because I get to talk about it a little bit. I love Cormac McCarthy as an author. His legacy has been tarnished a bit by some news that came out about him, which we won't get into, but if you want to look into it. As a pure writer, I absolutely love him. I have a ton of respect for his craft. Both of those books are amazing. The Road is one of my favorite novels. Absolutely love that novel. I would say No Country for Old Men was very good, but doesn't quite rise to that level. On the other side, I think No Country for Old Men is an incredibly faithful movie that is an amazing movie. That is probably one of my favorite movies. It's definitely up there. The Coen brothers just absolutely nailed this one. Performances all over the place that are so memorable. Javier Bardem in this movie, like you're never going to forget. Absolutely incredible. The Road, on the other hand, it was good. I remember rewatching it. I think I liked it more than the first time I saw it. I was able to appreciate Viggo here is someone who I obviously like a ton. I think it did kind of pull the vibe in from the book well, but there's just such majesty to the language of that novel that just can't really transcend into the film for me, to where I felt a little underwhelmed by the final project, as good as it was. So I'm going to go to bat for No Country for Old Men, even though I prefer The Road, the novel. I think No Country for Old Men was the better adaptation.
And do you think it was more faithful?
I think it was better and it was more faithful, honestly.
So yeah, this one is easy for me because I just don't love The Road as much as I know you guys love it. And yeah, I liked both. And also Cody Smith McPhee. He's amazing in Power of the Dog. He's so good. And as the child actor, he was great in The Road. And so I do prefer, I think I was actually the opposite. And I prefer the movie over the book for The Road. But I definitely prefer No Country for Old Men over The Road, though. Both book and movie, I thought those were just fantastic and incredible. And yeah, No Country, it's so faithful. And there's, again, nothing I would change. I thought it's a fantastic movie, very faithful. So yeah, No Country for me.
Agreed. We could still be friends. It's all right.
First of all, love Cormac McCarthy's work. I think that the way that he articulates a lot of his stories and the way that it feels so Americana in some ways, but also by tackling some of the most dark and depraved things. In No Country for Old Men, he kind of, I don't know that he's the originator, but this neo-Western kind of story that he's telling, I find to be so interesting and such a unique kind of storytelling that I don't know, inherent to America, which is usually we don't have things that are our own, we steal from everybody else.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the way that Cormac McCarthy tells the story of No Country for Old Men and the way that the Coens come in and they tweak it, but stay so true to the spirit of what the novel was trying to do, and like deliver all these incredible performances. While I just don't think that John Hillcoat was able to deliver on what The Road had as far as like depth and substance and layers, and like it was there in like kind of practice, but in like emotion and spirit, it fell a little short for me. Still, I love Vigo, like Luke said, but like for me, No Country just being like, I mean, I don't know, one of the greatest movies of its decade, and also such a faithful adaptation. Like for this one's a little bit easier than some of the other ones we talked about so far.
No Country it is then.
All right, we just had you on for The Monkey. I think it's time that we talk about Stephen King, and specifically Carrie and Shawshank Redemption. Now, there's a lot of people that I run into, and I would say your more casual moviegoer that says Shawshank Redemption is the best movie they've ever seen. And I think like that's a valid point. I think Shawshank is an incredible movie. Carrie, I think, defined a generation of horror. I think like what Brian De Palma did with Carrie was, I mean, it kind of, to me, feels like the first like big landmark kind of Stephen King adaptation that's like, holy shit, Stephen King is a different kind of storyteller.
Oh, I think it definitely was.
Yeah. And Shawshank being kind of the legacy of that film and like what it represents and everything. Like this is a difficult one to navigate, and I think it's going to come down to taste a little bit. But let's talk about faithfulness. If I remember correctly, there's some changes in Shawshank. Do you remember what those are, Laura?
So I remember, since this is a novella, if anything, I remember that the movie had some added scenes. I feel like I remember the endings being the same. Maybe the book, was it a bit more ambiguous? Whereas in the film, they were like, we need this to be more of a concrete ending. So we have this, to avoid spoilers, we get a shot that's kind of from a distance that's like solidifying what's happening.
You're
so
right.
maybe in the book it was more ambiguous, but basically still the same.
Okay. Yeah. And with Carrie, I feel like it was really faithful. Though I think maybe in the book, Carrie's abilities were even more powerful.
Yeah, maybe. I know, some things play out. I think the very end of the novel versus movie is a little different too.
We do see more of Carrie like practicing her abilities, and so we get a bit more details in the book, which generally that is the biggest change. It's like, oh, the book has more details. This is one where the movie definitely outshines the book for me, so I remember the movie better. But I remember the book actually did have a change as far as the John Travolta character and his girlfriend. Their deaths are different, and it's more dragged out in the book. I feel like as far as faithfulness goes, Shawshank is the more faithful of the two. But I'll just go ahead and say that I definitely prefer Carrie. I'm not one of those people, like, Shawshank is a great movie, but it's not one where it's like, wow, like, that changed me. Whereas some people, they do talk about it like that.
I think there are shots in there that Deakins pulls off that are just absolutely majestic. But it's like I struggle to say anything's my favorite movie. And the fact that like I've had so many people tell me that's their favorite movie is just like, I find it odd. I'm like, is this just a trend at that point? But it is a great movie. I every time it's on TV, I'm going to watch it. I enjoy watching it.
You know what I think it is? Like, it is a unique feel-good story by the end of it. Like, it really is like a life-affirming kind of movie that
very
it
uplifting.
just leaves you feeling good, uplifting, And like I could see people saying like, you know what, if I'm going to hitch my my wagon to something, I'm going to hitch it to this movie because it makes me feel great, and I totally appreciate that. Carrie to me was a movie I had never seen until we covered it. I remember De Palma was a really interesting filmmaker, and it had such iconic performances. Like obviously the blood-covered Carrie, like it's like moments you just never forget are like indelible to film history now and horror history. Absolutely iconic. But I think I am going to lean Shawshank personally because this movie's just so well made from top to bottom. I do remember it feeling more faithful. And I guess for me, I'm leaning more towards like which one I like better because that ultimately matters for me a little more. And then maybe I'll use like faithfulness as like a tiebreaker thing. Yeah. When I think back about both of these movies, I think they're both good, but Shawshank to me is a level above.
I would say that I think I prefer Carrie as a film, but I think Shawshank is more faithful now that we've talked through it a bit. So I guess I'm going to lean Shawshank. Let me restate that.
I'll say it sounded like you were going Carrie.
Yeah, it felt like I was. It felt like that's what my heart wanted.
Do it then. Yeah. Let Laura be the tiebreaker.
So I guess I do remember, like, in hindsight, thinking that Shawshank was very faithful. I also remember Carrie being really faithful as well, though, and I just think that I prefer that film. And for that reason, I guess I'll take Carrie in this case, with the caveat that, like, maybe I can be swayed into Shawshank. We'll see.
Yeah, I was just realizing too, like Shawshank is such an inspiring movie, whereas Carrie is the opposite. Like that is so depressing. So it's funny how
Bleak.
different they are in that way. But I also definitely prefer the movie Carrie, but then I do think that Shawshank is the more faithful. So this is tough because faithfulness, I would give it to Shawshank, and it is an amazing movie, but then I just prefer Carrie.
It's your show. If you want to take Carrie, then the Carrie will be our Cinderella story in this tournament.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have to fight back all the people with pitchforks
Which is ironic. Cinderella story for Carrie, right? Like,
yeah,
she's kind of an anti-Cinderella in some ways.
You know, I think I'll just go with the faithful one, and I'll still pick Shawshank.
Okay, she's defeated.
Yeah.
You defeated her.
How dare you?
I'll stick that.
Carrie's been through enough.
So true. Poor Carrie. So I'm going to go with, next up, we'll talk about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and The Godfather. So these are two movies, both from the 70s, that I think they both won Best Picture.
A couple of little movies you might have heard of.
Yeah. So super famous, iconic movies that I think have definitely outshined the book, especially Cuckoo's Nest. But maybe even The Godfather has outshined
I would say
book.
especially The Godfather.
Both, I think, yeah, kind of. The Godfather is like, man, that book is so, it's a bit bizarre. There's that really weird scene, right? With the...
Oh yeah, extended sequence with the surgery and all that stuff. Yeah,
this could be its whole other can of worms. But both of these books, another reason they're kind of a good matchup is because, and I've had people kind of disagree with me on both of these videos, because One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. First of all, I have nothing wrong with books having sexist characters, because I get that's a real life thing and that doesn't bother me. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, like the message of that book feels very sexist, and the movie makes a change so that it's not as bad. But same with The Godfather, where that book, it has sexist characters, and my problem isn't that he's portraying the mafia as sexist. My problem is how he's writing about it and how he writes the female characters. Like, that's where my issue comes in. And so on my video, people are like, you're upset the mafia is sexist? Like, that's just the way it is. Like, what's your problem? But it's like, my problem is the way he wrote it was just very upsetting. So both of these books have sexism written in a way that really rubs me the wrong way, whereas both movies improve that. I guess, do you guys have any thoughts on that before we get into the faithfulness?
Jump in there. I am so with you on this, Laura. It was a big problem for me in the book for the Ken Kesey novel. I know it was something that I wanted to like that book more, but I couldn't get over it. It was like unprompted. It just felt so weird. It was like he had a bone to pick with women, and he just had to like get it out.
Specifically, like women in leadership roles, like he wanted
exactly
to show,
like women who are trying to control men, and like it was like he had to make a point about this. And then Mario Puzo, that book is just full of it, right? And like you said, like part of it is that the culture he's trying to describe, it makes sense, right? The mafiosos, they're all so machismo, and they're going to not respect women. I think that kind of makes sense for that culture. But on the other hand, it felt like overblown, and it felt like a failing on the author, especially with what ends up happening with each of those characters. Because you can have a character existing in a sexist world and show them struggling against it, and show them in a way that reveals that they are a fully independent person with their own thoughts and their own motivations and their own agency in this world, and yet they're being kept down by the society they're in. There's ways to write stories like that can be incredibly compelling. He doesn't have any interest in doing that.
Yeah.
And so that definitely turned me off from that author as well. So I'm totally with you. But that just leaves like, how good are the movies? And how, we talk about faithfulness, both obviously make some pretty big changes, but both movies are excellent. They're I think, widely considered some of the best of all time, but for me, it's like, which one is the best, like often considered the best movie of all time, and that's The Godfather. I think people can argue that. Obviously, many have. A lot of people don't like Godfather, and I think that's totally fine. I don't think you have to like The Godfather to be like a good film fan.
That's not fine. That's not fine.
But I watched it. I watched it recently, like when we covered it. I guess not recently. This was like years ago, but I hadn't seen it. And when we covered it on the podcast, it was my first time watching it. And I went in kind of like expecting it not to be as good as the hype. But I felt like it totally lived up to it for me. I really loved it. And as much as I liked One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, like, to me, The Godfather's gotta be the winner here.
Yeah. This is like one of Jack Nicholson's most iconic performances with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I remember, like, speaking of the sexist stuff, like, it's not just like the fact that, like, you can have Nurse Ratched be a villain, but then it turns into like some weird like universal truisms about women in power and that, like, that all that stuff is when it feels like you're like, oh, you're not talking about this character. You're talking about like broad, painting with a broad brush kind of statements here. And then, Mario Puzo's novel was like, it was very pulpy and like, it just didn't, it was like, it was like meant to be this kind of like super readable, like relatable to men of the time, I guess, or as far as like his demo would be. And I don't remember any women that had much to do in that story other than be sort of like objectified or like, used for in service of the male characters. And then moving into the films, that Jack Nicholson role, I think, like, really kind of was one of the things that like was a feather in the cap of Jack Nicholson. There's this sort of like camp feel to the characters, and like you grow to love them, and like you're like kind of cheering for them to like get some level of freedom. And I think that like drilling in on that really improved the source material. And then The Godfather, I mean, like, there's just so much to say about it and like how it helped like define the cinema in that time period. I think that if we're just talking like what improved its source material more, The Godfather took something that was like fairly simple and humble beginnings and turned it into a masterpiece. Faithfulness, I would almost give Godfather credit for being less faithful in this sense. I think like maybe One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is more faithful, and Godfather not being as faithful to Puzo's novels like kind of sends it in a direction of like, I don't know, untouchability. So I don't know, if I'm to lean towards one, I definitely think I'm going to lean towards The Godfather. I'd be curious to hear someone say that One Flew has something else other than maybe possibly what we're here to talk about, which is faithfulness.
Yeah, I would pick The Godfather as well. Yeah, and I do love how The Godfather, because Godfather Part 2, that's part of the book The Godfather. So true. I love how they just took that whole section and they adapt that into its own thing. So that's just a really cool way to adapt a book too. But yeah, I guess I agree with everything you guys said. Almost again, like in the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in the movie, I don't remember it feeling like their problem with Nurse Ratched was that she was a woman. It was just that she was the one in charge. And then the ending of the book, they like tear her top off too. And so it's like exposing that she's a woman. She's trying to be a man by being a leader.
They have to like bring her down because of her gender, right? Like they have to use that as a way to attack her.
Yeah. And so in some ways the movie makes a significant change to like the messaging of the book, which would therefore make it less faithful, I guess you could say. So anyway, all the way around, I think we all choose The Godfather, though, ultimately is the better movie and it's also faithful.
Hard to argue against Godfather in this one, I think.
Yeah, let's see what else it comes up against.
Yeah. All right. So, okay, we only got one left on the initial rounds here, and that's All Quiet on the Western Front versus The Handmaid's Tale. A couple of light romps to get into here. Eric Maria Remarque, All Quiet on the Western Front is a novel that I just absolutely adored when we read this. It was so moving to me. This is the kind of war stories that I really enjoy, in that they are anti-war. And the whole book is basically about how terrible this is and how it's so bleak and yet so beautiful in a way. And it was written from such a place of pain and truth in the author who had fought in the First World War and wanted to reflect that in this novel, which went on to get banned by the Nazi Party because it was considered too anti-war and it made Germany look bad. Things like that. There's such an incredible history around this novel. This adaptation gets made, but this one was made by a German filmmaker who was able to come in, Edward Berger, kind of make a German version of this, which I thought mostly nailed that tone, mostly nailed that sort of anti-war messaging. I think it provided a little bit of some easy scapegoats that I wasn't necessarily on board with, that I don't know that the novel did. But all that being said, I thought it was really excellent. And pretty faithful too, honestly. Handmaid's Tale, what a great... we've only covered the first season on our show, but the first season is what aligns with the novel, right? Margaret Atwood's novel is legendary, groundbreaking novel that continues to be as relevant today as it ever was, unfortunately. What an astounding piece of work it is. I think there's plenty of fair criticisms you can level at it, but I think it has stood the test of time as a really interesting social commentary, and it paints a really scary vision of the future that feels unfortunately quite believable. And wow, what an incredible adaptation that was too. And we're talking about a show versus a movie. They have a little more time, they can spend with these characters, they can develop them in cool ways. I ended up liking them quite a bit. I know this really knocked out the other film version of this. Like there was a movie that came out in the 90s, I think, that I didn't think was nearly as good as the show, at least in my opinion. So this is a really tough one for me when we're talking about adaptation, and I think for once I'm not going to say where I'm leaning because I don't know. This is a tough one, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on both of these, both of you.
So All Quiet, I did love that movie. I think the book felt more horrific and more intense and more just like gut-wrenching. But then the movie is fantastic, for sure. Whereas The Handmaid's Tale, that one too, I think ultimately I did prefer the book. And the TV show, I feel like it does suffer from being a TV show because every now and then they would have things where it felt like they were just adding stuff just because they had to fill in times. So with both of these, I prefer the book ultimately, but faithfulness, yeah, I would almost say All Quiet is the more faithful of the two. But yeah, I don't know which one I would ultimately pick. So maybe James, you can help us try to figure out.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I'll get the ball rolling here. So both these books, yeah, very powerful. What they've done into society once they've kind of impacted. The book being kind of based on true events is like of All Quiet, sorry. I mean, makes it almost like indisputable. Like you're just like, oh, these things happened. And then we get to the adaptation where Luke said there's that ending that kind of like it seems like they got the wool pulled over their eyes a little bit, and I'm like, I don't think that that's necessarily how these things went down and how the reactions were happening. I think that like there was like a total brainwashing that led to total commitment, and that's even scarier, I think. And I think the book like kind of highlights that some more, and so the futility of it and how tragic war is in that way. And I almost feel like while I think that this German film that we watched it's really powerful stuff, and the way that they captured it felt really genuine. It did kind of give like a little bit of leniency or something. And then we move over to The Handmaid's Tale in a book that I feel like is like really empowering and important, and like something to point to as like a morality tale. Like this is where we can end up, and we see people in the streets these days protesting and stuff, and they're wearing the handmaid's garb and stuff. And that's just like when a story can impact a culture like that, I think that's really powerful stuff. So, and I do remember that first season specifically. Like I've seen more of The Handmaid's Tale beyond the first season, which I think a new season is coming out right now, just started back up. But which I haven't seen the last couple of seasons, but the first season I felt was so powerful, and I think was really faithful. While it did suffer from, like Laura said, some of that padding that they have to do with a show, which I think can be, I don't remember that book being like fair that long, and so I think there was quite a bit of padding that was added, which I guess would say that it's not quite so faithful. But I do feel like I remember that first season being something like really strong television. Like I remember being like, wow, this first season of the show is like just really good, and I think it really hits home on what the book is trying to do. I think just because the nature of the show being longer and padding and adding all that stuff, I think it's less faithful. So I guess I'd go All Quiet on the Western Front. But both just like really powerful stories, and I don't know, I could be swayed.
It's funny because you talking swayed me, and now I think I'm leaning. Oh, I guess I hadn't said where I was leaning, but you helped me in my mind listening to you talk. I'm like, I think it's Handmaid's Tale for me. As much as I did enjoy All Quiet, part of that enjoyment is my affection for that book, because I really, really love that book.
Yeah.
But I just had enough like minor sort of quibbles that kind of turned into a mountain out of a molehill. You know, it was like it ended up feeling pretty important, some of the messaging that got tweaked. Whereas I don't remember having that problem. Like there might have been some padding, but it didn't detract from the story for me in the way that did. So
you just swayed me.
Yeah.
You just swayed me, Luke. You're right, because ultimately, like the messaging of the film is somewhat changed in All Quiet, and I think The Handmaid still stays true to the messaging all the way through. So for that reason, I'm going to say it's more faithful.
And as you guys were talking, I was also leaning towards Handmaid's Tale, so that is the winner here.
All right. We got our first round out of the way.
All right, I'm going to take this in a fun direction, and like you said, we're going to speed this up a little bit. The Princess Bride versus Dracula feels absurd to me, so let's talk about that. So The Princess Bride is, we've already said, one of my favorite movies. Dracula, I think, navigates this interesting space of like reestablishing that Dracula can be taken seriously as like a vampire and a cool character. I think if I'm going to just like off the cuff react, my sensibilities and the faithfulness of this adaptation, I'm taking The Princess Bride because Dracula does change so much with that love story and everything like that. And I think I just, Princess Bride's amazing.
Yeah.
I think for me, this is an easy one, and I would also go with Princess Bride.
Yeah, it's not as easy for me because I really appreciate what Coppola did with that Dracula adaptation. But yeah, I think ultimately to keep things moving, I'm happy saying Princess Bride takes this one pretty handily.
And next up, so this is kind of an interesting pair, is No Country and Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah.
And for me, again, I already was kind of like, Shawshank isn't my favorite movie ever, and they're both incredibly faithful, but I would argue that between the two, I mean, there are some changes to No Country, but ultimately I'm going to say No Country because I do prefer that movie over Shawshank. And then also, as far as faithfulness, I'm not sure, but I'm just picking No Country regardless.
Yeah, I think faithfulness is an interesting because I feel like both are pretty faithful with some minor changes. So it's almost a wash.
Yeah.
So then it comes down to like, what are we left with? Both great movies. And like we've pointed out many times, I think there's a lot of love for Shawshank Redemption out there, and I think it's well deserved. But we're talking personally, No Country for Old Men is one of my favorite movies. I mean, Shawshank's up there, but No Country is just so brilliant. The way the Coen brothers capture these characters, the way it's shot, the silence of that film is like louder than any soundtrack could have been. Just an amazing movie that I love going back to. So yeah, for me, No Country has to take it as much as I like Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, I like Shawshank Redemption a lot. Again, I'm gonna watch it anytime it's on. I really appreciate Deakins as a director of photography, and like I think when you're
Frank Darabont, right, is the director. He did a good job here. Yeah.
Did a good job. And but when we're talking the Coens and like my sensibilities, and we're talking about like, I mean, Josh Brolin and like Javier Bardem as Anton Chigurh, like they created one of the most grounded, like just like imposing villains. And I think like if you're just looking at these on paper, I'm gonna go No Country for Old Men and not really feel too bad about it. Although I do like Shawshank.
All right, so we've got two others I can choose from here. Let's go Gone Girl versus Godfather. Silence of the Lambs versus Godfather. Okay, that's actually tougher because I was just thinking, this is easy. The Silence one. Yeah, okay, so Silence versus Godfather is an interesting matchup. This is one where I don't think faithfulness is a wash. I think Silence of the Lambs is the more faithful adaptation. Both excellent films. I would probably argue that Godfather historically is the more highly lauded critically film, but people like Silence of the Lambs quite a bit. It's certainly iconic, and I might prefer it personally as much as I like The Godfather. I don't know. That's actually a really tough question. They're definitely close for me. I don't know where I'm leaning. This is a tough one. Guys. I'm curious. What are your thoughts? Because I'm kind of on the fence. I thought when I first saw this bracket, I remember thinking Godfather. If we had done seeding based off of like likelihood to win it all, it felt like Godfather should have been a 1 seed. This is I think a favorite when you look at this bracket, but this is a tough matchup, and I don't know. What do you think? I
mean, if you're asking me, I think we always trot out Silence of the Lambs as one of the most faithful. But we're talking about The Godfather. We're talking about a film that, like, it defined auteur filmmakers in a sense. Like, it helped like elevate it in a way and really brought like this kind of filmmaking to the masses. And it's like it's a piece of art. Like when you watch it, you're like, this saga feels so universal, and it feels like so many people from so many walks of life can tap into it. Silence of the Lambs has Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, and it's I mean,
Jodie Foster is absolutely iconic in this movie.
Yeah, one of the coolest like detective stories that I can think of. Yeah, I think I'm gonna lean Godfather. I like The Silence of the Lambs a lot, and I think that a lot of amazing work was done there. But The Godfather, I'm also thinking like Godfather Part 1 and 2. Is that cheating? I don't know.
Oh, that's an interesting. I was just saying Part 1, but I honestly, I think I prefer Part 1, which I know is controversial. A lot of people seem to like 2 better, but I think 1 was my favorite.
Yeah, I haven't actually covered Part 2 on my channel, so that's partly why I didn't.
Look forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got to get you to do that.
Yeah. Luke might be the tiebreaker because I was leaning towards Silence because it is just so faithful. And then also just personally, I just prefer Silence of the Lambs over The Godfather.
Yeah.
Despite what the critics say. Because, yeah, like critically, I think The Godfather would be the winner there. But I just prefer Silence of the Lambs ultimately. And it's so faithful. So that's the one that I would be leaning towards.
It's funny, so you put it on me?
It's funny to talk semantics with these films too. Because it's like, these are two of my favorite movies, I think.
All right.
Like, you know?
All right. So I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do because I'm going to just go ahead and say, on our show, we have a Hall of Fame induction ceremony that we've started. We have all these rules around it. It has to be 5 years after we've covered it. And our first ever class was last year. And Godfather, spoilers for that episode, made it in as one of our first ever Hall of Fame inductees. I think this is a Hall of Fame adaptation. Absolutely incredible. But I love a Cinderella story. And we're talking about faithfulness to the adaptation. Like, that's kind of an X factor that I'm going to weigh in here and use that to push, I think, Silence forward in a like double overtime contest, right? Like this is going down to the wire, but I think Hannibal hits a 3, right at the end, and I think
we're gonna stick with the sports metaphors the whole way through for this March Madness stuff, huh?
Oh, we all know that our film and book fans are all huge sports fans as well. Right?
Oh, what an upset! What an upset! All right,
people will probably be mad. I you know what? I get it. But Silence, if any of these movies were gonna knock off Godfather, like Silence is, I think, positioned well to do it.
I don't feel bad about this scenario. If it's, Silence of the Lambs is right there. I think it's a great thing.
I mean, it also is super well acclaimed critically, right? Like this is a really well regarded movie.
All right, last one that we have for the final,
for the Elite Eight.
Elite Eight here. Yeah. So we're looking at Handmaid's Tale versus Shutter Island.
Yeah.
This is kind of difficult. I would say, for all the reasons we talked about Handmaid's Tale and like how powerful that story is and what it does as far as an adaptation, and Shutter Island, I think I'm going to lean Handmaid's Tale, but I almost feel like Shutter Island is like in a similar sense to like The Godfather was maybe a little less faithful than Silence of the Lambs. I think Shutter Island might be a little more faithful than Handmaid's Tale, but I think just storytelling wise, I might appreciate Handmaid's Tale a little more. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, faithfulness, Shutter Island would win because that's so faithful. But then Handmaid's Tale, that is faithful too. They just kind of add some stuff. Whereas, Handmaid's Tale kind of adds some things, whereas maybe Shutter Island doesn't have as much as the book. But faithfulness, I'd probably still say Shutter Island. But then also, I would be more likely to rewatch Shutter Island, but that's also because Handmaid's Tale is like 8 hours of your time. So I don't know if that should come into play.
It's a good point though, and it's Scorsese. So is that a +1 in that category? Is that a 3?
I mean, I would also say Handmaid's Tale is quite troubling in a way that it's hard to watch. That maybe Shutter Island you could have a little more fun with, just because of the twists and turns of that movie.
I guess I would go with Shutter Island. But I'm hesitant.
So you're throwing it to me, is what you're saying here, to break this tie once again.
You got to make the shot, Luke.
Yeah,
right?
This is, you know what? I won't belabor this too much because I didn't want Shutter Island to go through in the last category. I think I chose Big Little Lies in that previous matchup. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Handmaid's Tale here for the reasons that I sort of propped it up last time. I think the faithfulness is somewhat of a wash. I think just because it added some stuff doesn't make that adaptation not faithful. And they're both excellent, but it's really just I have some concerns. I have some qualms. I have some nitpicks about Shutter Island that persist for me, that holds it back just a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go ahead and say Handmaid's Tale takes this one.
That's fair. Princess Bride and No Country. Oh man, these are such a random pairing now at this point. But
yeah, Princess Bride versus No Country for Old Men. That's a tough matchup.
Also, just like No Country is like so dark, whereas Princess Bride is the total opposite.
Polar opposites, right?
Yeah. I don't even know. Do one of you guys want to go first and see?
I think it's easy to say just this right off the bat. Princess Bride and No Country for Old Men, 2 of my favorite movies. Like that's definitely, they're in the category of favorite movies, I would say. Yeah. I think that like it comes down to sensibilities because, and let's think about faithfulness as well. Let's keep that in mind. I do think that all 4 of these that we're on to now are very faithful, but Princess Bride being written by Goldman all the way through makes it incredibly faithful. It's also very clever, very fun. I like that movie a lot. It speaks to my sensibilities.
I will point out, if you remember from our coverage, Cormac McCarthy originally wrote No Country for Old Men thinking it was going to be a screenplay.
Yeah, I
and
remember
so
that.
in my opinion, it reads a little more like a movie than his other writing does.
Yeah.
It's a little more dialogue focused. It's a little more. I feel like the pace is a little faster. Certain things about it.
Yeah, and then what the Coens did with that film is just like, I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. I would say if I'm leaning towards one that's going to win in this scenario, No Country for Old Men.
I'm happy with No Country. I love both, so I'm fine with whichever.
You're fine with, or you feel good about? Like, you
I feel
good about
I feel
No
good
Country?
about No Country.
Okay.
Yeah, I love Princess
All right.
Bride, but
Yeah, don't want to twist any arms here. Yeah, I like Princess Bride quite a bit. I do think, if I remember from our coverage and just my memory of it, I don't love that movie as much as you do, James. I like it quite a bit, but I don't have any reservations about No Country for Old Men. I absolutely adore that movie, so
nice.
I'm happy with that one moving forward here and advancing to our finals.
Yeah, and then Silence and Handmaids. Yeah, and I'll keep this brief. I would go with Silence still for adaptation, and then meaning faithfulness wise.
Yeah. Oh, interesting matchup.
I would also just say quality of adaptation and quality of filmmaking. I think that Silence definitely edges out Handmaid's Tale at this point. I think it was a valiant effort by Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah,
but Silence
Handmaid's
of the Lambs
Tale ended up being a little bit of a Cinderella story. I'll grant that, but yeah, I'm with you. I think Silence. I think that this one's a pretty quick one. We can go ahead and slot in.
Which means we're down to No Country and Silence now.
No Country for Old Men versus Silence of the Lambs. What a finals. That's pretty tough.
I'm completely on the fence right now. You guys go first.
I will say, I think maybe, even though No Country is it's written in a cinematic way, I feel like maybe No Country, there were more things in the book that really had me thinking. Although Tommy Lee Jones, he does express a lot of those thoughts, but Silence of the Lambs, the ending of Silence of the Lambs, he ends with that line in the Silence of the Lambs, and it's just so incredible. But I would still recommend people read the book, and yet at the same time, I feel like there's more to gain from reading No Country, whereas Silence, everything great about that book probably is in the movie. So because maybe there's more to gain from reading No Country as a fan of the movie, maybe that means Silence would be the better one of the two.
So many thoughts are swirling as you're talking for me, because I'm like, yeah, I think Cormac McCarthy's the better author to Thomas Harris.
Yeah.
Maybe that's controversial to say, but I don't think so. So yeah, if you're gonna read one of the books, I'd point you to Cormac, because just the way he writes is so incredible. But yeah, we're thinking about the movie that at the end of it, they're both so damn good, but I'm just struggling to knock out No Country with Silence.
I love that we ended up with psychological thrillers here.
Yeah,
one's a psychological thriller, one's kind of a crime thriller.
We could do this whole bracket again with 16 other projects, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
One day down the road, because this would go very different depending on what was on this bracket, of course.
Yeah. I do think that Laura makes a lot of good points, though. If we're here to talk about faithfulness, we're here to talk about both of these films. I would say are on par with each other. I think we're right there. But Silence is kind of the pinnacle when I think of faithfulness and adaptations. For things that we've covered on our podcast. So I'm kind of, that's what I'm leaning towards right now. I think that's what Laura was implying somewhat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I'm okay with it, but I'm going to go to bat for No Country just so that it's not unanimous, because it doesn't feel right. Just because of how spectacular that movie is. And one of the things that I absolutely love about both of these movies, but I think No Country is really an excellent example of leaning into the power of your medium. The Coen brothers made an amazing movie out of a really good book, and they didn't use voiceover, they didn't use a soundtrack, they used cinematography, they used what they're showing on screen, they let scenes breathe, they used amazing performances, and they crafted something spectacular that still absolutely nails that philosophical sort of existential despair around the changing world and what it means to be a good guy in a world that seems to have gone mad. And is it even possible to be that? And there's so many things that are just caught up in that final Tommy Lee Jones dream that he describes, and the way that character carries the themes of that are so rich and complex. Whereas I really look at Silence of the Lambs and I think it's an excellent story. It's about a serial killer who acts as a mentor of sorts and becomes infatuated with the person he's mentoring. But ultimately, he's helping her catch another serial killer. And it's a very thrilling novel, very thrilling movie with excellent performances. But for me, it's like the themes, it just doesn't quite rise to the level of No Country. So when I'm putting them against each other, for me, it's like I would have to slot No Country above it as far as like personal favorites. But we're talking adaptations, faithfulness comes into play. And I don't deny that Silence of the Lambs is one of the most faithful ones we've ever covered, that it still manages to be an excellent film. So I'm okay with Silence winning, but I just want to say I'm going to bat for No Country, and I am curious if I swayed anybody. Give it one last shot.
If we're picking which movie I prefer, I think that you would have swayed me to No Country for sure. But we're talking faithfulness here. I think No Country, like you very well said, everything. The film is a little more interpretive, I would say, than Silence of the Lambs. Whereas Silence of the Lambs is just incredible performances. But I do want to note too, we ended up with two of the most iconic villains of the last 30 years or so.
Yeah,
40 years. Yeah, pretty wild.
Yeah, and I feel like, oh man. This one is tough because now I am almost like, well, maybe it should be No Country, but
maybe it should be. What would Hannibal have to say about Anton Chigurh? That's interesting.
He would say.
I feel like ultimately my arm is being twisted in either direction, right? Because I'm like forced to make this choice. That's so hard.
Yeah.
But
it's your show, so I think it's going to have to come down to you, Laura.
Yeah.
Who's taking it all? Who's taking home the trophy?
I think they're both so faithful. Silence might be a bit more faithful, but then, I don't know. Now I'm kind of thinking that maybe No Country deserves to win because it is super faithful. And also, again, there's just, it gives you so much to think about. And like I said, the book kind of delves into those themes even more so, but the movie still does a great job. And it's one you're left thinking about. Granted, you think about Silence of the Lambs afterwards too, but
oh, for sure. I mean, we're this is always tough when it's like we had this in our Hall of Fame discussions. Like we're talking about the best of the best.
Yeah.
So whenever you're outlining like a difference, and you're trying to like focus in on a flaw, it seems like you're putting way too much emphasis on it. And it's because you're just trying to find anything to separate them.
Yeah. And our time is running out, but I guess is everybody
buzzer beater
fine with us ultimately picking No Country? How do you feel about that, James?
Ooh, No Country.
I love it. I'm totally fine with it. Yeah, I love that Luke was able to sway you too. Like and me really. Like I was right there. So
I was ready. I thought it was all over. I thought it was Silence, but
wow,
I love it. No Country for the comeback.
Yeah. So from 16 beloved, faithful, very faithful adaptations, No Country for Old Men beat out all of them, in large part thanks to Luke's very persuasive argument in its favor. So congratulations to No Country for Old Men. But this was really fun. It was tough at times.
Congratulations to No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Coen brothers are really excited.
Yeah, right.
And again, all of these are ones that Ink to Film and Why the Books Wins has covered.
Yeah.
So if people want to hear more, definitely look for these videos. And then, definitely subscribe to Ink to Film. They also have a podcast as well. Did you guys want to have any last minute thoughts about your show before we close out?
Yeah. I'll just say that we are primarily a podcast. We love our audio listeners. We do have a video component, and we have a YouTube channel. And if you're on YouTube right now watching this, then we'd love to have you come subscribe to our channel. But if you don't think you want to watch an hour-long video of us talking about adaptations, I get it. Subscribe to the audio. We'd love to have you there as well. So, this is what we do. We talk about adaptations in depth. We have discussions about them. And sometimes they go weird ways, but we always have fun. So, we'd love to have you follow us.
Yeah, and in general, our show is like the basis and the premise around our show is Luke is a writer and I'm a filmmaker by trade. Like that's what we do professionally. Mm-hmm. And then we came together to create this podcast to talk about each individual medium and then kind of combine thoughts and see. We do comparisons for sure, but we love to talk about like what the intentions of the artists were and that sort of thing.
Nice.
We've had Laura on several episodes.
Yes.
So if you want to check out those episodes, what is it? We got Big Little Lies, recently The Monkey.
Poor Things.
What else?
Yeah, Poor Things.
Poor Things, yeah.
Joyce Carol
so there's
Oates.
several.
Yeah. what was that? Smooth Talk? Smooth Talk?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Smooth Talk. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was an interesting one too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say is thank you so much for having us on, Laura.
Yeah,
we
thank
really
you.
appreciate this. This was a lot of fun. Like I would be down to do this again with a whole new lineup at some point
Yeah.
because hopefully it does well and people like it. So make sure to like the video and subscribe. Make this do well.
And also comment if you agree or disagree. We want to hear from you, and we can talk about this.
I'll
And-
definitely come check the comments on this video too.
Yeah.
Like I'm really curious to see what people say about this.
Yeah. So thank you again to Ink to Film, Luke and James. I'm a big fan of your show, so it's awesome that we get to collaborate. And yeah, so thank you for joining me for this one. So thank you again to Luke and James for joining me in today's video, and thank you for watching, and definitely comment your thoughts again. And if you did the bracket ahead of time, comment and let me know if No Country won when you did it as well, or if not, who did win. And again, whether you agree or disagree, even if you vehemently disagree with our choices, we want to hear from you down below in the comments. Ink to Film, like he said, they will be popping in to read these comments as well. And be sure and pop over to their channel and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Bye.